This is indeed a disturbing universe.
Hello and welcome back. Today we're discussing the fourth episode of The Simpsons, There's No Disgrace Like Home. It's episode number 7G04, and it originally aired on January 28th of 1990. It was written by Al Jean and Mike Reiss, directed by Greg Van Zo and Kent Butterworth. And of course the showrunners for season 1 were Matt Groening, James L. Brooks, and Sam Simon. So the question is, should you skip this episode? And the answer is a very firm maybe. It just sort of depends. I think this episode still holds up when it comes to the story and some of the jokes, but once again, this episode also gets a lot of things wrong. Most notably, the personalities of all the Simpson family characters. They're completely different, even from the Simpsons we know of in season 2. So if you know nothing about the Simpsons, you're not going to learn that much from this episode. But when I watch There's No Disgrace Like Home, I actually enjoy it instead of wondering how much time is left until it's over. So it's hard for me to say definitively that you should skip this episode, but I'd say it's completely acceptable to do either one. If you're just trying to get to the really good stuff, definitely skip it. But if you've never seen it, it is a good episode to watch. It has the first appearances of Eddie and Lou, even though Lou is yellow when he's supposed to be black. But it's the first season and they're still trying to work all the kinks out. It also has the first appearance of Dr. Marvin Monroe.
Dr. Marvin Monroe is based in part on David Viscott, the late Dr. David Viscott, radio therapist, who had a voice some people thought was annoying.
Oh, in fairness, he didn't look like this.
What?
He was
did
much
not
better
look like
looking
this.
than Dr. Marvin.
I actually liked him. I actually enjoyed his show.
I enjoyed his show.
Yeah, we met him. He worked on the episode we did of Gary Shandling's show.
You feel you're going to lose control, punch the baby, kick your wife, do whatever. But you can be angry at someone and want to hurt them, and it doesn't mean that you're bad for it, merely because it's you.
Wow, that's basic leftism 101. So we also get our first look at an Itchy and Scratchy cartoon. Although it had previously appeared in a Tracy Ullman short. But it's just an ordinary, run-of-the-mill, generic cat and mouse cartoon at this point in the series. There's nothing all that interesting about it. But as far as Mike Reiss and Al Jean's script is concerned, Act 1 begins with the Simpsons getting ready to go to a company picnic, which was being held on Mr. Burns' property, and Homer makes it very clear that he's extremely worried about his family embarrassing him, which is oddly out of character for Homer. And during the picnic, Marge decides to get drunk and embarrass the entire family, which would normally be Homer's job, right?
Remember last year?
Look at me! I'm a puffy pink cloud! Oh, well, of course. Everything looks bad if you remember it.
Instead, Homer actually insists that the entire family undergo therapy, and he got the idea from watching a commercial of Dr. Marvin Monroe's ridiculous money-back guarantee.
Family bliss or double your money back. So call today.
And to pay for it, Homer is willing to pawn the television. And on top of that, Marge offers to pawn her wedding ring instead, just to save the TV.
Couldn't we pawn my engagement ring instead?
But the overall personality of the Simpson family as a whole seems to be intact, because when they finally do undergo Dr. Monroe's therapy, he quickly realizes he's going to have to bring out the big guns, and gives each family member the ability to shock the others with a blast of electricity. And of course, that turns out exactly as expected, which is obviously the funniest thing we've seen in the first 4 episodes. Especially this shot of Maggie understanding things that babies just shouldn't understand and having a great time while doing it. The last time something like this happened with Maggie was the second episode, Bart the Genius. But also this quick cutaway joke of Mr. Burns and Smithers.
Boy, someone's really gobbling up the juice, sir.
Excellent. Excellent. Perhaps this energy conservation fad is as dead as the dodo.
And while we're on the subject of Mr. Burns, this episode has his first reference to releasing the hounds.
I suggest you don't dawdle. The hounds will be released in 10 minutes.
And there's also this scene with Mr. Burns and Smithers greeting the power plant employees as they show up for the company picnic. And they use notes that they previously wrote onto index cards to remember everyone's name as they greet them. And this scene on its own isn't very notable, but the DVD commentary is.
There's an interesting stuff about Mr. Burns here. You can see his voice is different and all that. And when Al and I wrote the script, the character had no name. I think we called him Mr. Meanie
in our draft, yeah.
In our draft. And the idea of Mr. Burns reading off of cards to greet his employees came from something Al had read about Ronald Reagan. That's how he would greet people. He had a bunch of index cards handy. And the early Mr. Burns, I think, was a little more Reagan influenced than he ultimately is.
So everyone knows that Al Jean and Mike Reiss have severe liberal brain rot. But as Ronald Reagan himself once said,
"The trouble with our liberal friends is not that they're ignorant. It's just that they know so much that isn't so."
So here's why he really used those index cards.
The president's famous one-liners, his best jokes, written on both sides. You know, this is the humor of Ronald Reagan in 3x5.
This one is titled One-Liners. Adolescence is the time when children suddenly feel responsible for answering the phone. It's pretty good. It's funny.
Someone has once said that actually, as long as there are final exams, there will be prayer in schools.
I can remember when a hot story broke and the reporters would run in yelling, "Stop the chisels." I've wondered at times what the Ten Commandments would have looked like if Moses had run them through the U.S. Congress. What are the 4 things wrong with Soviet agriculture? Spring, summer, autumn, and winter. Just to show you, this is the best one.
Just show you how youthful I am, I intend to campaign in all 13 states. When I go in for a physical now, they no longer ask me how old I am. They just carbon date me.
Mr. President, in talking about the continuing recession tonight, you have blamed mistakes of the past, and you have blamed the Congress. Does any of the blame belong to you?
Yes, because for many years I was a Democrat.
So do you think Mike Reiss is really being honest about this? Do you really think he and Al Jean loosely based Mr. Burns on Ronald Reagan? Or do you think they might just be trying to retroactively insert politics into their earlier work where there were no politics before? Or maybe they were already infected with liberal brain rot. But I think it's important to mention that the audio commentary comes from the DVD that was released on September 25th of 2001, which means that the audio commentary was more than likely recorded during that short period of time between the 2000 election and the day that those 2 famous buildings in New York City were deleted. You know the one. And we all know how angry the far left extremists were at that point. So angry, in fact, they would have said anything to discredit a Republican. And don't misunderstand me, I'm no Republican. I voted for Harry Brown in that election. I'm just saying there's nothing about Mr. Burns that reminds me of Ronald Reagan in any way. And the reason Mike Reiss gave for it doesn't align with reality. And if you ask me, this is exactly the kind of liberal brain rot that has destroyed The Simpsons and has made it completely unwatchable, even if it wasn't owned by Disney. So as I said earlier in this video, Al Jean and Mike Reiss made a lot of mistakes, mainly with the Simpson family characters and who they are. Homer's very concerned about what people think of him and his family, and is very self-conscious about the way they act in public. Marge is lazy and likes to drink, and not only was it wildly out of character for Homer to pawn the television, but Marge actually suggested that they pawn her wedding ring instead. This just isn't Marge Simpson. And many people say similar things about Lisa, but I think that you could just chalk that up to character development and her arc over the first 2 or 3 seasons. She sort of changes over time, and she eventually becomes the annoying, angry liberal that we all know. And I think it's also important to mention that this is one of the few episodes that has 2 directors, and one of them was Kent Butterworth. He was also the one who was assigned as director to Some Enchanted Evening, the episode that was so bad it almost killed The Simpsons, because it was originally planned to be the series premiere, but it was postponed due to the horrible animation. So they assigned David Silverman to reshoot that episode.
No, you know, if this is what we were stuck with, there would have been no show.
And I'm not sure why Greg Vanzo was assigned to this episode along with Kent Butterworth. It could have been an afterthought to repair things that he did wrong, or perhaps they were both originally assigned to this episode so that Vanzo could show Butterworth the ropes. I don't know. But Greg Vanzo is obviously a very important director for The Simpsons, because he's the one who founded Rough Draft Studios in Korea, so he was deeply involved with the development of this show. I'd say the producers probably trusted him to do a good job. But this episode is the very last one that has Kent Butterworth's name on it as a credit, and I was unable to find very much information about why he left or whether or not he was fired. Either way, I think it's safe to say that things just didn't work out with this guy. And regardless of how they disposed of Butterworth, I actually think this episode is the best looking one we've seen so far. It's only the 4th episode, but I think it looks pretty good. So just let me get back to Al Jean and Mike Reese. I know I've been talking a lot of smack, but I actually really like this episode, even though they did get a lot of things wrong. It has a lot of memorable moments in it, the most obvious one being the family shock therapy scene. But all that stuff at the Burns Company picnic was great too, especially the end of Act 1. And there's something about that cutaway scene with Mr. Burns and Smithers when Dr. Marvin Monroe and the Simpsons were using up all the electricity in Springfield. It really feels like a Simpsons episode. Although I'm not really sure how they're using up all the electricity in Springfield when Dr. Marvin Monroe clearly mentioned that he was using a generator.
Don't worry, I'll have plenty of time to explain while I warm up the electric generator.
It doesn't really make sense that Mr. Burns would notice that. But whatever, I really like that scene. And as far as the writing goes, I also think this is the best episode we've seen so far out of the 4. Which is also not saying a whole lot. Because as I've said before, most of Season 1 just doesn't hold up like episodes from Season 6. I mean, even the clip show from Season 6 has this episode beat. But that doesn't mean it sucks. I actually love how they concluded this episode with the Simpsons literally defeating psychiatry with nothing more than family dysfunction. It's brilliant, and Al Jean and Mike Reese are great writers despite the liberal brain rot. In terms of the series as a whole, this episode is the lower side of mediocre. But if you're just looking at episodes from Season 1, it's on the higher side of mediocre, which makes it an episode that's mildly enjoyable, and also one that you wouldn't miss much if you skipped it. And that's my opinion that no one asked for. So if you've made it this far, thank you very much for watching, and I'll be back soon with Episode 5, Bart the General. I'll see you then.